Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Well, you may be familiar with addictions. You may have some issues around addiction yourself. You would certainly know people who have various addictions. As a social psychologist, I will say to you that America is defined as a nation of addicts, and we have many addictions as a nation. And there is also a term called soft addictions. You don't have to consider yourself to be an addict even if you're not putting something in your arm, a needle in your arm. There are shopping addictions and overeating addictions and what's called process addictions rather than substance addictions. And I'm going to be very pleased to have my guest, Nadine Lucas. Welcome, Nadine.
Thank you. Welcome.
You're very welcome, who is a licensed mental health counselor and a certified counselor in something called Internal Family Systems Model, which is, we happen to have the identical credentials. And I found you on a podcast with Tammy Solenberger. And, because of your connection with addictions, the traditional way that it has been handled in Alcoholics Anonymous and all of these spawns of Alcoholics Anonymous, whether they're Overeaters Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous or Clutterers Anonymous. And because I find both subjects very, very fascinating, first of all, addiction and the 12-step movement, as well as how the internal family systems model identifies and frames addictive behavior, because I think that it's absolutely fascinating and very encouraging for all of us. So welcome again, Nadine Lucas. So tell us how you would define an addiction.
So for me, an addiction is a behavior that is done in excess. So we do it too much. We overeat, we overspend, we overshop, we overdrink. So things that we do to an excessive degree.
So I imagine the term addiction connotes that almost against our will. It's a weird thing with the will. Would you say, Nadine?
Absolutely. People feel like they have no control over it, and it's something that happens to us. In fact, that there's a belief that it's a disease.
Right. And hence the term compulsive, right? A compulsive overeater. I am compelled. In Overeaters Anonymous, there's a terminology. 1 bite is too much. 1,000 bites are not enough.
Correct.
That the recovery is in abstinence. And as long as I don't take a certain substance or even a behavior, into my body, my brain, then I am relatively free of that particular issue. Correct. However, once I take it in, whether it's one drink or 1 bite of cake, I'm off to the races. So does that seem to be the way you see it as well?
Well, that's the way that I used to see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us how you see it now, Nadine Lucas.
So the way that I see it now is that I don't know what your listeners know about internal family systems, but it's a system that helps people come to know the truth of who they are and to recognize that they have parts, and parts are really trying to help. and the parts are part of our personality. And so,
let me stop you right there.
Sure.
Because as a therapist who that is one of my modalities, my basic framework, looking at the fact that we have a psyche made up of parts, and people immediately think of the 3 faces of Eve,
right?
Multiple personality disorder. And then the way I explain it is, like one part wants to go out to the party and the other part just wants to stay under the covers and watch TV. And people have used parts language forever.
Right.
But people get a little frightened. So tell us more about parts.
Right. So as you said, our psyches are made up of parts, and these make up our personality and who we are. And we have parts. Everybody has parts. And the theory behind internal family systems is that all parts are welcome. And so as you said, we might have a part that wants to go to a party and a part that wants to stay home. In terms of what we would consider addiction, I have parts that want to eat sugar all the time. And then I have parts that are saying, no, criticizing that part. No, stop eating the sugar. What are you doing? And the idea is that we are burdened with these behaviors due to trauma that we experienced in childhood. And so the behavior is a burden that can be healed through the IFS model.
So no more behaving along the lines of eating sugar or drinking too much alcohol or over shopping. Right. Okay.
Yes.
So how do we unburden ourselves from those behaviors?
So we work with a practitioner or a therapist. There are some people who try to unburden themselves. I personally have found it very difficult to do by myself. But the idea is that we have an aspect of ourselves that we call self. Dick Schwartz calls it self. And this self is very spiritual and is the core of who we are. It is not something I have. It is something that I am. And so I am compassion and curiosity and courage and creativity. There's 8 C words. And when I am living from this place of self, I am able to make really healthy decisions, make what we call self-led decisions that are not coming from my parts. So my parts are trying to be helpful. They're trying to help me to either avoid feeling something that is uncomfortable or to run from something that is feeling uncomfortable. So usually around addiction, there's a lot of feelings of shame. And so when we have parts that are burdened with shame, we have other parts that jump in and want to rescue or protect these shameful or burdened parts. And so
I wanted to stop you here, Nancy,
yeah.
Lucas. So I often think about pain, and I'm glad that you're bringing in shame because shame is so incredibly painful.
Yes.
And shame, as I look at it, is that I think I am wrong.
Correct.
So guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at the self with a capital S, as coined by Richard Schwartz, the creator of the internal family systems model, it is the higher self. We can call self with a capital S the higher self. Many people have different names for it. The soul. In the 12-step movement, we call it the higher power, which can be a traditional religious God or just a sense of a higher self or some sort of higher power in the cosmos. And Richard Schwartz talks about that this is, as you said, this is inherent in us. It's not something we have to find or develop. We are this. I like this. I am compassion, the 8 C's, if I can remember.
Yes.
I am compassion. I am courage. I am creative. I am calm. I am clear. I am, remember anything?
Curious.
Curious. I am curious. Yes. So, okay. So I just wanted to, because this is such important material that I want to make sure people are with us. Mm-hmm. So the shame and pain and blame, self-blame, right, mm-hmm. is so huge that people avoid or run away from those feelings and thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So go ahead. And then how do they do that?
So I don't know exactly how they take on these burdens. I mean, what the exact nature of that is, but it's a job that they take on. So they might say, well, I'm going to, this other part feels a lot of shame and I don't want to feel shame, or something is really traumatic in my life and I don't want to feel what I'm feeling. So I'm going to take on this burden where I'm going to eat sugar. And the analogy for me is that when I was a child, and I had some childhood trauma, that my life wasn't sweet. And it was very challenging, very, very difficult. And there was parts of me that needed sweetness in my life. And so what they did is said, well, I'm going to take on that job and I'm going to find sweetness in my life. And so they decided to do that, and that was their job. And as long as I was having sweetness, I wasn't able to think about the terrible things that were happening.
Preempts. So the cookies, the cake, the chocolate, the candy preempts the idea of, my goodness, my childhood trauma is so unsweet. It is way too bitter. It is way too bitter to take in, to digest. And so we make that decision, and I think it's a subconscious decision.
Yes.
Early in life. And I too had the same situation, and I was a good eater, quote unquote, but I loved my sweets. And as a result, I was a chubby kid. And I was bullied for that my whole developmental years. And that's a whole other burden, right? That's the nature of addiction, that we use something or we do something, if it's a process addiction, to save us from shame and pain. Mm-hmm. And then it takes on much more of a pain.
Exactly. It creates more pain.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And many people are in this conundrum and this terrible cycle. And many years ago, I joined Overeaters Anonymous, and there was a term called white knuckle abstinence.
Yes. Meaning
that you did not partake of the sweets. However, I continued to have this craving. I wanted to eat sweets. I craved sweets, and it felt like a real burden not to have the sweets. It felt like a deprivation. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not that way at all anymore. I do not eat sweets because they're not good for me on any level, but there's absolutely no craving involved and no desire and no sense of deprivation. I feel lucky and happy that I am not eating sweets in my life. So that's decades in the making to get to this point.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So for me, I'm not at your place yet, but I believe that it's possible to be there. And I believe that it's through the healing that when self shows compassion to these parts that are suffering, and the parts begin to trust self, then they choose to let go of the burden. They choose to let go of the overeating or the shame and everything that goes along with it. And for me, I'm still in that process.
Good for you. Well, you have to be in it to win it, and to be in the process. And all we can be is where we are. Mm-hmm. So, the idea of self with a capital S, that it is inherent, it is love, it is soul, compassion, curiosity, courage, calm, and that it is our birthright. We are connected to all there is. We're connected to the cosmos. We're connected to all the beauty. And maybe even not so much beauty in the world, but we are a part of it. And I will tell you as a psychotherapist that when I introduce this concept to my clients, that they say, well, self isn't going to help me when I'm miserable and lonely on a Saturday night. I want my cookies.
Right.
And that connection of self, we call it in the internal family system model, we call it the maestro, the teacher, the parent, the nurturer, building a relationship with these wounded parts. So would you call it a wounded part, that a part that's burdened with trauma, as you said, that wants to sweeten life up? We
Absolutely.
Also call it an exiled part, the part that we exile into our subconscious. We're not even aware it's there. So the belief is, I really want this ice cream sundae, right? I really want this. That's all I want. That's all I care about. And because it's a false need, but it's so paramount. It's so huge, rather than I really want to be seen. I want love. I want a hug. I want understanding. And that's the power of these exiled parts, that they are so deeply hidden.
Exactly.
To prevent the pain, that we can't even reach them.
And I think, like you said, they're hidden from consciousness. We're not aware of them.
Right. We're not aware of them. So you have been very well trained, well studied in this. So tell us about they're hidden from consciousness, and how do we help them so that they're not wreaking havoc in our lives, and they don't have their sticky fingers on the steering wheel of the car that is our life.
Right. And so the key is the relationship, and it's done through mindfulness and taking time and stepping back and having somebody help. For me, it's a therapist, and I'm learning to do this for myself. When I'm feeling a part that wants to overeat or eat sugar or something, to sit down and pause and to take a moment and to ask from a place of curiosity and compassion, what do you need right now? What is going on for you that you want to eat this sugar? And being patient and listening for the answer, because the part does know. The part has information for us, but we have to be willing to hear it.
And as you said, Nadine Lucas, we have to be willing to ask it. In other words, to become a self-therapist, a self-coach, a self-teacher, a coach asks smart questions and gets smart answers. Right. So even the question in and of itself, like I'm aware that I'm craving cake, sugar, cookies, chocolate. That's all I care about in this moment. And that pause is so important. And how many people don't even give themselves the pause to ask that very profound, reflective question. What is it you really want?
Yes.
So go ahead. So tell me about finding those answers. And I also agree that it really does help tremendously with facilitation, outside facilitation, the whole self-parenting model, which has been around in the recovery movement for decades.
Yes.
This is another version of it. And what makes it a little bit more complicated is that it's not one inner child, and right in the internal family system model, we look at it as every time we've been traumatized, another exiled part, another wounded part is born.
Yes. Yeah.
So
we have many inner children.
Multiples, right? Multiples. So it makes it even more complex. Mm-hmm. So go ahead. I know I keep interrupting you.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
So in asking these questions, the parts have a story to tell, and it's being willing to listen to the story and when you're coming from a place of compassion, you're not judging this part, you're not criticizing this part, because that's actually another part that is criticizing this part. And so that's when we talk about having many parts. So we can ask ourselves, or we can be facilitated, how do you feel towards this part? And if it comes from a place of compassion and curiosity, we're coming from a place of self. If there's anger and frustration and criticism and not liking it, those are other parts. And so we want to acknowledge those parts and say, yes, you have very valid opinions. We appreciate those opinions, but right now we're asking you to soften back so that we can get to know this other part. So it's this constant conversation negotiating between your parts. Are you willing to step back? I can give you some time later, but right now I'm working with this one. Would you be willing? And giving an opportunity for everybody to say what they need to say. And I do that through journaling, through art journaling. When I walk, I know some people, that rhythm of walking helps sort of meditative state, and just allowing these voices and these parts to share their stories with me. Beautiful.
And what I find about Richard Schwartz's model of the internal family systems is that it is so reflective, and it is so, as you say, relational and conversational and self-supporting. Mm-hmm. And yes, I think outside facilitation is excellent, and we are also self-supporting. I really like the idea, Nadine Lucas, of your own personal art journaling and journaling in general, and walking as meditation. And being in the question, what I say to my clients is that of all the C's of the self with a capital S, curiosity is the easiest to access. It's the lowest rung of the ladder. Mm-hmm. And just to be curious and to take that judgment away. And another thing that my clients have a very hard time accepting is that the critic in us, we all have an inner critic, is actually trying to help us.
Exactly.
Can you speak to that?
Well, I think the critic, is different for different people. For me, the critic is trying to help me in a way that is trying to help me stop a particular behavior. So if the part is criticizing me for eating, it's wanting me to stop eating. It's just doing it in a way that's very bullying.
Right.
Rather than a very gentle way from self, or a gentle, loving parent. No, honey, you can't have that right now. It's not good for you at this moment, or not yet, or later, or not at all.
What do you really want, honey? What do you really want, honey?
Yeah. Like you said, love and a hug. They want compassion. These parts need to feel compassion.
Yes. And the concept of self-compassion, Nadine, is such an elixir, and it is so hard to come by. Have you noticed that? It's just amazing. We are taught to be compassionate to others to some degree, not enough in my view. Mm-hmm. But with the idea of self-compassion, people confuse that with complacency. Oh, I'm saying it's okay to do this, and I'm saying it's not bad to do this. And do you find the same thing?
Oh, definitely. It's very challenging.
Yeah, it is such an incredible reframing to think of the critic as protectors. That the critic, the bully, the self-critic is actually trying to help us, because the languaging is so awful.
Yes.
You're a piece of crap, and you can't do this, and you're worthless, and you're a failure, and you're stupid, and I can't believe you ate that again. Mm-hmm. You say, oh my God, get rid of the critic, right? Get rid of the critic. And so many of my clients say they hate their inner child that's acting out. And then I ask them, well, is that how you would treat a real child who is acting out? Would you berate them? Would you beat them up? Would you put them down? What would you do? Oh, no, I would hug them. I would reassure them. Yes. So this whole act of self-parenting. Mm-hmm. So what is your experience with that, Nadine?
Yeah, so self-compassion is a practice that we have to do it daily. I think it's a constant practice. It's a constant getting in touch with. And so, as I said earlier, you can't just say, "Oh, be compassionate." It's not something intellectually that you can do. It's something that has to be a felt sense. And so that's where, when we pause and we slow down and we feel into our bodies, where do I feel this sense of urgency or this need to eat something? Where do I feel this criticism? And then when we ask some of these parts to step back and we want to get in touch with the part, that wants to overeat, the idea is that when these other parts step back, what we have left is self. And as long as there's a critical part, then that part is getting in the way of self. And it's kind of like the cloud is covering over the sun. Self is the sun. And what we want to do is we want to remove the clouds, sort of one by one.
I love that metaphor of the self with a capital S being the sun, mm-hmm. and the parts being the clouds, because it's so handy, right? Mm-hmm. The sun is always there.
Always.
And the clouds are transient and they float and they shift. And just keep unlayering these parts. So again, the idea of the self-parenting and asking these kinds of questions. What do you also hold yourself, hug yourself? Do you advise your clients to kind of hold on to themselves as well?
Yeah, I do that. I do more of a mental, imagine your inner child and you giving yourself a hug, giving that little child a hug. Some people use dolls or, like you said, cuddling up in bed with a nice cozy blanket, a nice cup of tea, different ways that we can show comfort to ourselves. I
like that, using dolls, teddy bears, blankies, you name it. So Nadine Lucas, we are over the show. We have 1 minute left, and it just has flown. And I knew this was going to happen. I invited Nadine Lucas to come to a second show. So this is part 1 of a 2-part series. So the good news is that if you're interested, tell your friends and family members to tune in next week to Just Relationships, where we will do and talk to Nadine Lucas again. And meanwhile, Nadine, is there any way people can get in touch with you?
Yes, we have a program on Facebook. They can reach me at our email address, which is pathtorecovery365@gmail.com.
Oh, that is beautiful. Thank you, Nadine Lucas. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.